Throughout the referendum campaign, they relentlessly pushed incendiary messages about immigration. Britain was under attack. The country was being invaded. Europe was allowing terrorists to run amok. The aim, it seems, to fuel tensions over immigration.
Did we at some times go a little bit over the top? Probably. It was ruthlessly executed in a business-like way, and, we stayed on message.
In the febrile atmosphere, a Labour MP was murdered by a far-right extremist just days before the vote.
The street behind me was the scene of the first murder of a British Member of Parliament since 1990.
Put all of you together, take them all in!
You were a refugee once!
The immigration debate was ignited, and immediately after the vote, a spike in hate crimes followed.
Don't chat, you're not even from
England, you little
How old are you? You little All the bread here, bruv. All the bread here. Well, speak proper English then.
This programme has seen new evidence showing Arron Banks' Leave.EU actively targeted supporters of some of Britain's most extreme far-right groups on social media, like the BNP and the National Front. When asked about it, Arron Banks repeatedly lied. We've also learnt that months before the referendum, the BBC obtained evidence of Leave.EU targeting these groups.
So why did the BBC never report this story? It's February 2016. 4 months before the referendum, and Leave.EU is attempting to become the official Brexit campaign. The BBC is given a tip-off about them. It's a series of Facebook screen grabs showing a Leave.EU advert. They include these pop-up messages from Facebook telling the user Leave.EU wants to reach them based on pages they've liked and ads they've clicked on. In this case, far-right groups. A BBC reporter writes to Leave.EU's communications director Andy Wigmore, saying they're planning to run a story about it the next day.
We have evidence to suggest Leave.EU has targeted paid advertising on Facebook at those who have liked the pages of the National Front, EDL, BNP and Britain First. This was because Leave.EU wanted to reach people interested in each of the aforementioned groups.
Inside Leave.EU headquarters here at Millbank Tower, the report caused panic. Emails we've seen show their digital team confirmed the story, but Arron Banks proposed a different response.
It's not true. We just buy sponsored Facebook as they place the ads. Arron.
An employee from the digital team sends an internal email saying the BBC story is true.
Those are our ads. We have targeted those groups since the beginning of the campaign as they gain most traction.
With Banks not copied in, another senior employee chips in.
Is Arron's answer acceptable? The truth is we do target likers of other groups, including these ones, but that is how Facebook advertising works.
When an employee proposes saying they do target all political parties, not just the right wing, Banks replies,
"Not the right answer."
The original employee replies later.
Just to confirm, from the beginning of the campaign, we have targeted these groups on Facebook.
The story the BBC had was true, but according to the emails we've seen, the response from Arron Banks and Andy Wigmore wasn't. They decided to launch a full-on assault on the BBC, claiming the corporation was biased and threatening them with legal action. And they appealed to the then head of BBC political programmes, Robbie Gibb. He's now Theresa May's top spin doctor.
Robbie Gibb is one of the most powerful people in Number 10. He's been the director of communications there since 2017. During the referendum itself, Robbie Gibb was in an equally powerful role at the BBC. Despite the Leave.EU social media team telling him otherwise, Banks writes back to the reporter, copying in Gibb.
It's wholly wrong to say we have targeted extreme right parties any more than, say, communist. It's anyone who has expressed an interest in leaving the EU. Your report needs to reflect this, or it will be biased, and if we have to, we will take whatever legal action we need to protect our reputation.
Then, in a series of late-night emails to Robbie Gibb, Banks complained about their spokesman Richard Tice being dropped from a BBC programme, claiming this was all a smear campaign.
We do not specifically target the BNP or any other party or group, and to say otherwise is wrong. Off the back of this, Richard Tice has been bumped off the Marr show again. Why can't he go on and defend our position if necessary?
Half an hour later,
all this is an attempt to portray us as racist.
Minutes after emailing Gibb, this is what he told Richard Tice.
I don't think they will run it after all that lot. You will have a busy week next week, since Robbie will react by giving us massive exposure.
Here's how Arron Banks claims the incident unfolded in his book, The Bad Boys of Brexit.
I woke up to news that the Beeb is planning to run a smear story about our Facebook pages. Robbie Gibb is being quite helpful and says he's trying to hose it down.
The following morning, the BBC didn't run the story, and Robbie Gibb responded to Arron Banks about the cancelled interview.
The Marr programme felt it would not be able to ignore the story during the planned interview. As all the facts are not yet clear, we did not think it was appropriate to conduct the interview at this time. We also felt it would end up dominating a short interview and, whatever your case, putting Mr. Tice in an unfair position.
And that was that. We don't know who made the decision to cancel the interview and exactly what discussions took place inside BBC News. But the BBC insist it was the decision of the programme's editor.
The role of the BBC as a public service broadcaster having to present impartial coverage, it is very concerning. This story, which wasn't shown, wasn't broadcast, I'm really concerned about why they didn't do that, and certainly as a select committee I'm sure that we would want to be looking into that next time we speak to the Director General of the BBC.
Tonight, Robbie Gibb told us,
"These allegations are ridiculous and without merit. I remain proud of my contribution to the BBC's impartial coverage of the 2016 EU referendum campaign."
The former chairman of the BBC Trust is also concerned. Lord Patton told us these are serious allegations and that the BBC's Director General should investigate why the story was dropped. So why did this story not make air? Did the BBC cave under pressure? The BBC told us the story was dropped because they were unable to establish that Leave.EU had targeted far-right groups deliberately. They say Robbie Gibb was not the editor involved with the story and had no say in the decision not to run it.
So what you've seen is Arron Banks was clearly lying to a journalist. What was your impression of these emails?
Well, that is how Mr. Banks operates. He doesn't abide by rules, he doesn't respect rules, he doesn't respect the law, and if he doesn't get his own way, he will bully people and intimidate people until he does get his way. And unfortunately, based on your report, it seems that he got his own way with the BBC in this particular situation.
The BBC deny that and say they resisted the pressure from Arron Banks. Of course, there are lots of reasons why news organisations drop stories.
I think what the emails show, firstly, is the intense political pressure that the BBC was under in the run-up to the referendum. I mean, bullying, legal threats and so on as well over just one story on one day. Secondly, I think it shows how the BBC struggled to manage its impartiality in a very polarised environment.
As a former BBC editor, is this a story you would have run yourself?
Well, a story that says the part of the Leave campaign is targeting the far right on Facebook is clearly a good and legitimate story, particularly in the light of what we now know about targeted ads on Facebook. So yes, it's a story that I think could and should have run at some stage.
It did run, but in the Brexit supporting Sunday Times a few months later.
Arron, just to your left.
And Arron Banks turned on Robbie Gibb. Leave.EU failed in their attempt to become the official Leave campaign. And when the BBC chose not to include Nigel Farage in their big Brexit debate,
Voting now only one day away.
Arron Banks put Robbie Gibb's mobile number on social media, encouraging Brexit supporters to bombard him with calls. 2.5 years later, the National Crime Agency announced a criminal investigation into Arron Banks over the source of the millions of pounds he spent on the referendum campaign. He went on the BBC to deny any wrongdoing.
Rock Services is not a trading company.
Well, we're going to have to agree to differ on that. I think I know my business affairs better than you.
We tried to follow up, and he refused to speak to
In my
us.
interview tomorrow,
And will you be willing to come on Channel 4 News to answer some questions on that basis?
Look, I'd rather go and put a revolver against my temple and pull the trigger than go on Channel 4 News, if that's okay with you.
In a statement tonight, Leave.EU questioned our methods and journalistic integrity. They also threatened to post one of our journalists' personal phone number on social media. Britain's biggest political donor remains very active in campaigning around Brexit. Social media allows his group and others to operate in the shadows and produce disinformation. But can we sort fact from fiction?
Well, in response to that report, the BBC have told us tonight in a statement, the BBC covered hundreds of stories on Brexit. We have seen no evidence to substantiate claims that our editorial standards have been compromised in any way.